All right, today we are diving into something pretty provocative. It's a sociological study that looks at choosing a life partner almost like picking a stock. Yeah, you heard that right. It makes a really bold, data-driven argument, and we're going to break down exactly how it gets there.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the core idea behind the whole study. Then we'll dig into the four big pillars it's built on: money, stability, safety, and culture. And then we'll wrap up with its final, pretty controversial conclusion.
All right, first things first. The whole foundation of this study is what's called a rational choice argument. What does that mean? Well, it means it's looking at marriage not just as this fuzzy romantic thing, but as a strategic decision, something you can analyze with pros and cons, risks and rewards.
And that brings us to the big question the study is trying to answer. In this crazy modern dating world, can you actually use data to find a low-risk, high-return partner? Stack the odds in your favor? The study's answer is a resounding yes.
And they don't bury the lead. Here's their big takeaway, right up front. The study concludes that if you're looking at all the numbers, socioeconomic data, safety stats, you name it, East Asian men as a group represent what they call a high investment, high stability, low risk model for marriage. It's a huge claim, so let's dig into the evidence they use to back it up.
Okay, so let's get into the first pillar of their argument, the money. The study basically says that, look, a solid financial foundation is pretty much the bedrock of a stable marriage. Let's see what the data says. So the study throws this number out there right away, $536,000. And according to their sources, that's the median net worth for Asian American households. But, a number like that is pretty meaningless without some context, right? And this is where that context comes in, and it's pretty staggering. That $536,000 is nearly double the median net worth of white households. And get this, it's almost 12 times that of black households. The study uses this to say, hey, we're talking about a massive difference in financial security right from the get-go.
And it's not just about the money you have right now. The study argues it's about future security too. I mean, look at this. During a recent period where inflation was going nuts, Asian households actually saw their income grow by over 5%. At the same time, white households stayed flat and black households actually lost ground. The study points to this as a huge sign of economic resilience.
Then the analysis pivots to something really interesting, a specific cultural practice. It's this idea of handing over the salary card. The study argues that this isn't just a nice gesture. It's a system that basically makes the wife the CFO of the family. It gives her direct control over the money, which is a world away from the Western norm of your money, my money, and separate bank accounts.
Okay, so we've talked about money. Now let's move on to family stability. The study's argument is pretty simple. That financial security we just saw, it leads directly to more stable marriages. Let's see if the divorce stats back that up.
So right away, the study tackles a pretty common assumption, right? The idea that interracial marriages are just statistically less stable. But the research says, hold on, that's way too simple. It argues that lumping them all together is a huge mistake, and that the specific pairing of the couple changes everything.
And boom, here's the key piece of data on that. According to the research they cite, the Asian man-white woman pairing isn't just not risky, it's actually one of the most stable pairings out there. Their divorce risk is on par with, or in some cases even lower than, white-white marriages. That really flies in the face of conventional wisdom.
So the natural question is why? What's going on there? Well, the studies suggest a big piece of the puzzle is how different cultures handle conflict. It lays out these two models. A Western one that's all about individual expression, getting it all out, which can escalate things. And then a confusion model that puts family harmony first, which the study argues creates more resilience in the long run. All right, the next pillar in the argument is maybe the most stark of them all. We're talking about physical and legal safety. The study looks at data on violence and incarceration, framing them as major risk factors when choosing a partner. Now, the study looks at rates of intimate partner violence experienced by women and uses that as a proxy for the rates of violence likely committed by men of the same racial group. And the disparity it finds is really significant. Asian women report the lowest rates of this kind of violence, and it's by a pretty wide margin. And here's another risk factor the study hones in on: incarceration. I mean, look at this chart. According to the data, Asian men make up a tiny, tiny fraction of the federal inmate population, just 1.6%. The study basically calls this a safety dividend because the risk of your family being torn apart by a partner's imprisonment is statistically almost zero. Okay, so we've gone through the hard numbers on money and safety. But the study also dives into some of the softer, cultural stuff that it claims adds to this, well, this comparative advantage.
One of the big ideas they talk about is soft masculinity. The study argues that things like the global rise of K-pop have helped popularize a different ideal of what it means to be a man, one that values gentleness, being thoughtful, emotional intelligence. And it presents this as a really appealing alternative for Western women who might be tired of what the study calls toxic masculinity.
And to bring this idea to life, the study points to quotes like this one. It's all about the acts of service love language, which it says is common in East Asian cultures. It's this idea of showing love through doing things, caring, practical actions, instead of just saying the words. The study suggests that for someone who's tired of empty promises, this tangible, show me don't tell me approach can feel much more real and reliable. The study then makes a very specific case directed at Black women. It frames the choice of an East Asian partner as a kind of strategic divestment, a conscious move away from what it calls struggle love and systemic hardships, and a move towards what gets termed the princess treatment. The idea being a life where you're financially secure and cared for by a partner who is all in.
All right, so we've looked at the economics, the marriage stability, the safety stats, and the cultural appeals. Now, let's see how the study wraps all of this up into its final and, frankly, pretty provocative conclusion.
But before we get to the final word, it's really important to note that the study doesn't pretend these relationships are perfect. It absolutely points out some very real potential challenges, things like dealing with complex mother-in-law dynamics, the potential for prejudice within families, and navigating some pretty big differences in communication styles.
But even with all those acknowledged challenges, this is where the study lands. This is its final, unambiguous bottom line. It says, look, if you treat choosing a partner like a strategic, rational decision, almost like you're managing an investment portfolio, then the data overwhelmingly points in one direction.
So, at the end of the day, the study makes a really powerful argument based on statistics and group averages. But it kind of leaves us all hanging with a big important question, doesn't it? In this incredibly personal search for a life partner, a world with a million variables, how much can a rational choice based on data ever really predict something as personal as happiness?